Okay, so before we get going with the webinar, my name is Marie, and I am a project coordinator with Rural Roots to Climate Solutions. So everyone's going to be muted during Carrie's presentation, and this is just to cut down on like feedback and background noise. But there will be a chance to ask questions and discuss at the end. So if anything comes up, just make a mental note or write it down so you don't forget. If you're feeling shy, you can use the chat box to ask your questions, and I can ask Carrie on your behalf. But please don't be shy. We really appreciate hearing you speak up and ask questions. Also, if you have a question, most likely somebody else on the call is wondering the same thing too. So it helps everyone's learning if you ask your questions. Sometimes on Zoom calls, the audio can be a little bit iffy depending on your connection. So if this is happening to you, you can just turn off your own video feed and that will sometimes help. We will be uploading our conversation today to YouTube, so everything is recorded. And I'll send out an email to everyone to let you know when we've posted it to our YouTube channel so you can review it. If you don't want to be recorded, you can just turn off your video feed and direct any questions to the chat box for me to ask Carrie on your behalf after her presentation. So Rural Roots to Climate Solutions, we are an Alberta-based nonprofit organization that operates out of the Stettler Learning Center. And we host workshops, field days, and webinars across the entire province, empowering people with climate solutions. So we work primarily with agricultural producers and rural Albertans to create a space for discussions to happen around climate solutions. And we are always strong advocates of the idea that climate solutions can also be your farm solutions. So welcome today to our webinar, Farming with Nature, with Carrie from EcoServices Network. Farming with nature rather than against nature is really at the heart of what we try to do at Rural Roots to Climate Solutions. So I'm really looking forward to Carrie's presentation today. Ecosystem goods and services will play an important role in how we can farm with nature. So it's great to have you here today with us, Carrie. So with all of that introduction out of the way, Carrie, I will pass things over to you and let you introduce yourself so you can get going with your presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Marie. And thanks for inviting me to give this presentation today and talk about some of the work of the EcoServices Network. I've been with the EcoServices Network for probably about, working in some capacity for about 10 years. I just put up my screen, so I think you'll see here the presentation. Hopefully everybody sees that.
Yeah, I get it.
Great. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned, I work with the network and oh, there we go. Oh, let's go back, of course. Okay, so today I've been asked to talk about kind of what's going on in the province that'll help farmers get rewarded for their positive impacts on ecosystem services or for providing ecosystem services. And so with that has come some challenges and limitations. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and really try not to make it so complicated, but sometimes it does get very complicated. So, which I'm going to leave a bunch of time at the end so that we can have time for discussion and questions and all that good stuff. So as Marie mentioned, don't hesitate to, jot a question down as I'm talking because we can come back to that after the presentation and after I blab away for a couple minutes, for about 30 minutes. And so we'll talk about, I guess, some of those market-based solutions available to you today or maybe in the near future. So that picture there that we see it's actually me. I was in a combine. I was out on a field day learning about Alberta farmers. And it was like a perfect day. I just loved it. It was so much fun. But normally this is what you see me where I work. It's like I'm in my office, I'm at my computer. So I really can't wait to get back to days like that where we can get out and I can see some faces and spend some time with people again. I'm so excited for that. But anyways, today we're here, we're on Zoom, which is awesome that we can still gather on and have opportunities to still present some of this information. So thank you again for your time today. So I'm going to talk about the network, which is a bunch of organizations that work collaboratively that build the knowledge and capacity in support of conservation markets. And I'll also present one of the markets that we're working on as a pilot with the Western stock growers. And so, so that can kind of give you a bit of an idea of, how some of this stuff can be applied. And certainly maybe something to look forward to in the future. With that, I wanted to just kind of go over some of the terminology that I'm using. So I'm sure you guys know what ecosystem services are. You've probably heard it several times, but like you might hear, it's like valuing nature, environmental assets, natural capital, green economy, benefits humans receive from nature, and all that good stuff. So it can be anything from pollination services, wetlands, biodiversity. It even includes things like, production of food, like in cattle and rangelands and all that, and all that are included in ecosystem services. So that's what we're talking about when I say ecosystem services and you see it on these slides. The other one that I wanted to quickly mention was conservation markets. Common language is really important. And when we say conservation markets, we're talking about putting an economic value on land and water assets. So, just as, for food production, we put an economic value on that. What we're doing is we're trying to find ways to put economic value or value on ecosystem services and biodiversity. And that can be done through regulatory markets like compliance markets, where buyers and sellers are required to participate to comply with regulatory limits. Or there's voluntary markets where they're participating for reasons, such as stewardship or sustainability reporting or risk management. So those kinds of things would be like voluntary markets. But both markets have shown to have positive effects or positive impacts on things like economic diversification, business innovation, enhanced competitiveness, and environmental excellence. So those are the reasons why the network is involved in creating these markets, and why I guess why I'm here today is and promoting kind of the conservation markets and ecosystem services. So in terms of financial investments, so over here's some of the information that I pulled about what's kind of happening in Alberta or Canada for financial investments, who's paying for ecosystem services. So in Canada, there were at least 462 million annual payments for ecosystem services, and in Alberta, that it's about 100 million invested annually directly for ecosystem services. So there are some instances where there may be some projects or some investment at individual level or things that haven't really been captured, but those are the big projects that have been, or initiatives that have been captured. So 100 million annually. It's a significant amount actually, and some of those things are some of the organizations you're already aware of. So Ducks Unlimited invested 65.7 million in Canada-wide. Nature Conservancy, 11.5 million in Alberta. Alberta Conservation Association, 4.7 million in Alberta, and that was through their projects. Alice invested over 800,000 in Canada, and that was, and keeping in mind that reference year is 2017, and that's just what I had pulled for some of the research that we've done in that. So there is financial investments that are happening, but there's still some challenges and limitations to people accessing this, and some problems with these financial markets or these market approaches. And here's some of the things that we are aware of and some of the things that the research supports in terms of the challenges and limitations. One is scale, is that these market approaches tend to be small and they're fragmented. So they happen for very specific reasons. Like I mentioned, the ACA, it's for projects that they're working on. And so it takes a while to build that up. And then the buyers in those markets can be small as well, that there's not very many buyers. There's also a challenge in terms of awareness that sometimes, sellers like yourselves, they just don't know about the various payment programs or payments for ecosystem services. Sometimes, you might be aware of them, but then you look at it and you're thinking, well, they're very inflexible, or the rules to participate are too rigid. Perhaps there's, their expectations for a farmer are too onerous. Costs can be quite high, whether that's transaction costs, so that's even costs that before you even implement anything, transaction costs could be like there's an expectation that you're going to do a bunch of sampling and measuring that costs a lot of money before you even can, access the market funding. There's the BMP implementation cost, and that cost benefit sometimes, it's too high, or maybe sometimes it's not even really well understood. Measurement, certainly measuring ecosystem services is something we've spent a lot of time on, and it's difficult to assess and measure it because you're looking at not only kind of that, we've been measuring for decades the environment and environmental indicators, but how do you measure that human benefit? And that's what's really key and important to ecosystem services, and difficult to come up with indicators. And so each market program also uses different measures for similar objectives. And so that also can become a challenge or a limitation to some of the success of these programs. Some of them also have, unrealistic expectations. And this is just, this is some of the things that we've heard. This isn't, necessarily, I don't feel that they're all unrealistic, but it is, depends on who's accessing it. But some, feel like the contracts are too long and too stringent, that there is this expectation to achieve some outcomes that are outside of a landowner's control, or the expectation really has nothing to do with the expected with the outcome. So that can happen too. And so, with that these kinds of problems and questions, that's what the ecosystem services has spent their time trying to address. And so these are the big categories or buckets of where we've been working over the last 10 years. So, in terms of assessment and measurement, how do we know humans are benefiting from what we're doing on the farm? In addition to the food production and producing of food, of course, humans benefit from that. And how much are they benefiting? What are the units? How much should they be rewarded per unit? Then there's the whole market infrastructure component. So market infrastructure is things like, how does the market function? Where do people go to buy and sell ecosystem services? So that's kind of like, where's the ecosystem service, or the conservation Kijiji, the Craigslist, the Amazon, for ecosystem services. That's what we're talking about when we say market infrastructure. Data and information management is, there is a wealth of data out there, so much data that, it takes these big, huge databases, computers, mathematical equations, stuff I'm not really going to get into today. But this is like, how do you use that data to measure ecosystem services and then predict that change? After, if a BMP is implemented, how do you predict that change using all this data? And there are some, really smart scientists that can pull that information together and measure that for us. And then communication engagement, very critical in terms of letting other people know, sharing results, and really uncomplicating this whole conservation market and ecosystem services. So that's where, what we're trying to do with the network as well. Okay, with that, what we've learned, and I kind of have touched on this already a little bit, but things we've learned is standardized metrics and a centralized data source or platform are really important in terms of integrating into decision making, tracking, and accounting. So it's kind of that one-stop shop, like that Kijiji kind of thing that I was mentioning. The challenge with that is, people say that they want that one-stop shop, but when you really get into the details, they want that one-stop shop as long as you're using my research, as long as you're using my model, or that kind of thing. So we kind of have to rise above that a little bit and say, okay, what's better for Alberta? What's better for the environment? What's better for, in terms of competitiveness of an industry? And look at, building all of that into a standardized metric and data source. Both buyers and sellers require certainty that what you're measuring is credible and you're all clear on what you're actually buying and selling in a marketplace. So if you're investing in say, habitat, that you're not buying the rights to that land, that you're buying. So it becomes that question around property rights and things like that we look at. But also just in terms of being clear on what's being measured is really important. And we've looked a lot at that. And we need to also be sure that what we're demonstrating, that the project itself actually contributes to the desired outcomes, because nobody wants to be be involved in kind of that greenwashing or anything like that. So being able to demonstrate that you actually are achieving certain objectives, environmental objectives, is critical. There's also, we spent a lot of time on balancing that scientific accuracy with complexity and cost. So, we work with a lot of scientists in academia that, they really want to drill down to that perfect answer, that perfect model, that perfect measurement. But sometimes, getting there becomes really complex. And then when you're trying to implement it, it becomes really costly. So we always try to keep that in mind. It's like, sometimes it's good enough, and then let's just keep working on it as we move forward. And then there's the whole thing is we still need to verify it. So what we do in a lab or, on a desktop or in a model still needs to be verified at the farm level, still needs to be ground truth, to make sure that what we've created in, the science world is tested and verified at the farm level. So with what we've learned, I want to show how we've applied that with the Western stock growers in this Grassland Conservation Exchange pilot project. So, with grasslands, we picked something to like that really there is a lot of pressure to convert grasslands. So we're talking mostly native grasslands when in this pilot project, just to start, not to say that down the road, other types of agriculture systems could be included in this, but right now we're talking mostly about native grasslands and the pressure to convert those grasslands to something like real estate development or higher crop value for crops. And so, why an exchange? Exchange is just going back to kind of what I talked to before, because of those pressures, there's really no market cost right now for diminishing those environmental benefits. And there's also no market revenue for producing ecosystem service benefits. So that's kind of why the pilot, why grasslands. We are working, as I mentioned, with the Western stock growers, but also some other members involved in the advisory committee from people that are work in the field as consultants and people that have their own programs. But anyways, with that advisory committee, also some people from one person from a municipality. So the key principles were designed by this committee, and these were things that said, okay, as we develop an exchange and want to apply a pilot, these are the things that we need to keep in mind and really come back to when we're kind of stuck on something, such as, what should be measured. Well, let's come back to these key principles then. And so we wanted to start with that the market would be voluntary. So, down the road, maybe we would incorporate compliance market buyers, but to start, we're saying this is a voluntary approach. So we're not looking at something that like an offset situation right now. That would be cost effective. We've talked about that already. It would be efficient. So this efficient approach is pretty critical in saying that we don't want the buyers to have this operational burden of having to be involved at the implementation level of these projects. So that we don't want them involved at the farm level. So we want to create a framework or an exchange where they would enter the market and be assured that everything was science-based, it's credible, it's transparent, but they don't have to then get involved with the minutia of and the the farm level kind of implementation. So that was pretty important. The other one is that this market is what they wanted was something that was outcome based and outcome focused. And I'll get a little bit more into what they're actually measuring. But so it goes beyond payments for BMPs, is that they wanted to pay for those outcomes, not necessarily the BMPs that are going to be implemented. And then that it'd be adaptable so that when, we better understand kind of the science and the technology, that we can adapt the exchange, keeping it simple. And that means, not necessarily the science is simple, but the things that users are going to use and the communication tools are simple. And that we think it's pretty innovative too. So it's not, and we don't think it has been done before. So that's how we're, so that is one of the key principles that we have. Here's kind of what the framework looks like. And you might have seen something similar. Like, I don't think that this is, entirely all that new. Like, these components are around. I think what we just did is we kind of pulled it together so that this is how we understood how the exchange would work. And so it has components like you have it, of course you have a seller and you have a buyer. And so the sellers in this case would be farmers who supply grassland ecosystem services. There's an index calculator, which is kind of like a discovery tool used to identify those ecosystem service assets, and a way to kind of standardize those metrics, like I was mentioning before. There's the verification process, so that authenticates the ecosystem service and biodiversity benefits. And then there's a registry. So this registry kind of tracks issues, transfers, retires, kind of grasslands units, I guess. It could be credits in the exchange. And that's kind of where buyers and sellers meet up. So that could be considered your Kijiji, I guess, in that registry. So that's sort of what it looks like. And I'm going to talk more about where we've spent some time over the last years, really that grassland calculator or index. And so that's where I'm going to focus the rest of this presentation. The other stuff, we've got some ideas on what that looks like, but we haven't yet really put a lot of work into like the verification or the registry just yet. So what's traded, or what's traded, what's measured? So these are ecosystem service benefits. So they have 4 main buckets of environmental values that would be measured. Biodiversity, which would include species abundance, species richness, and connectivity. There's soil health, which includes soil aggregate stability and organic matter. And then there's water. So it could be water storage volume, it could be area of riparian areas, and then also water quality. And then there's also the whole culture and people that are included in the whole buckets of environmental values. So that could be things like recreation. Are there people coming out to your ranch to do some bird watching? Do you have access for hunters? Is there some sort of traditional land use from Indigenous people? And then there's, are you a steward of the land? Do you have regenerative agriculture practices? Do you have some leadership awards? Are you involved in your community? So we just wanted to have some, in that case, just something that recognizes that, there's some really good stuff that's happening out there. And, maybe they should get a little bit of maybe we should value and recognizing that a little bit more. In terms of measuring these, so how these would be measured is sometimes they're measured through models. And sometimes, so for instance, the biodiversity, we can measure that through some of the models that Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute has available. Same with the water quality. We work with Dr. Wenhong Yang, and he's got some watershed models. You guys maybe have had some presentations by him, but he can model water quality and water storage with his models. The soil health could be just, that's based on actual measurements of soil health and going out and taking some core samples, sending them to the lab and getting back, that those what kind of organic matter or aggregates, soil aggregate stability you have. And so all of that though is also then verified. So if it's modeled, it's then also verified in the field, as I mentioned in that step. So it's not just, here's the model, we're gonna sit and, that's the measurement, as we also would go out and validate that. So after you've got those, measurements, we would pull it together in some sort of a report or index. And so what that index looks like is it's all these measurements, and all these measurements are different. So some of them are, kilograms per hectare, some of them are tons per acre, some of them are, biodiversity is an index kind of thing. Connectivity is a density value. So now we're talking like a whole bunch of different metrics, and the way to standardize that metrics that we came up with is you would compare it then to the regional value, and either your metric would be above or below that regional value. And so, and then that would be the number that would go into the overall index, and it would go into that overall index in some sort of weighted combination. So if I've got some cattle producers on the call, we based this index off the cattle feeders index and your EPDs, I think they're called. Anyway, so that's what this was based on, is kind of that kind of an index. And then so we used the cattle feeder index, and we said, okay, let's use that and create a ecosystem service index. And so when we're talking about weight of these is, so some of them that we're pretty confident in the measurement, we might give it a bigger weight than some of those things that we're not so sure that we're measuring it correctly. So things like, water quality and water storage, we're pretty confident that we can measure and verify it. And so we might give that a 30 out of 100. But things like recreational value, we don't really understand how to measure that in terms of an ecosystem service. So that might only get a 5% kind of thing out of 100 when it goes into the calculator. So the next steps for all of this is really about continuous improvement in the science. We know that the measures aren't perfect. We could have stronger indicators. We can refine the process. We can have additional metrics, like we can, add in things like maybe we add in specifically carbon down the road. Right now, that's not what we're measuring, but down the road, we might measure that. We still need to kind of unlock that complexity in terms of data collection, measurement, and management. We have to always, that's a continuous process, I think. Further develop the market infrastructure. So right now, the calculator is a spreadsheet right now. So it would be nice to have something like that were actual sellers. So producers, ranchers go in and they enter their information, and it spits out, your report. The verification, we have a pretty good idea that verification is going to be, remote sensing, rapid testing, simple things like, we want to spend an hour or two in the field, not much more than that. But that still needs to be done. And we plan to actually do that this summer. Is we're going to be there, piloting some of those verification processes this summer on some test sites throughout the province. We also have to build that Kijiji, the registry, and we need to look at this from a sustainable business model perspective. Is that what happens, once the pilot's done? How does an exchange get updated? How do you add in data? How do you adapt it and continuously improve it? So those are some of the next steps for the Grasslands project. And I just wanted to make sure I acknowledged some of our partners and our funders, because those are always very critical when you have projects like this. Just before I end and take a breath, I just wanted to mention one project that I'm pretty excited about, is Alice's New Acre project. So it's not new, but so in 2020, they spent 2.3 million, went out to communities, farmers and ranchers, and that was across Canada. But what's really exciting is, and I don't know if you guys have heard the recent news or news release that in 2021, just like I think a couple weeks ago, they've partnered with Cargill and A&W on New Acre project, and they've added in this grazing forward and an additional $1.8 million. That's for farmers and ranchers to implement grazing management practices that benefit ecosystem services. So that's pretty exciting, and that's something that, you know, for sure keep your eyes on. And you know, look for more information. All that's on their it'll be on their website as well. Or if you have an ALICE person in your municipality, in your area, yeah, for sure, reach out to them and you know, find out more, I guess. I mean, even if you're not a cattle producer, I think there's still lots of opportunity and benefits through the New Acre project as well. So that's kind of, you know, up and coming. But then, yeah, there's also the, you know, the grazing management, the grazing conservation exchange that I talk about. Hopefully, you know, we'll be able to roll that out with some funding and some potential buyers attached to that as well. So I just want to quickly check in. I've talked about current and future conservation market opportunities for farmers. We talked a bit about the challenges and limitations, and hopefully for you, I've unlocked some of that complexity, but certainly let's do more of that in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carrie. That was great.
Yeah.
That was great. Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Carrie while we have her on the call here? That was a lot of really informative, helpful information. So thank you for that. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. You can just click on the mute button and you can ask Carrie directly, or if you're feeling shy, but I hope you're not feeling shy, we're a friendly bunch, you can type your question into the chat box too.
Hi, it's Karen Tunquist. I work with Alberta Agriculture. I don't have a question so much, just a comment on the continued work in this realm. I know it is complex, and I know it is one of the biggest challenges is finding the market or creating the market, promoting the market, you know, getting the buyers and the sellers together. So yeah, I'm just glad to see that it's still moving forward and progress is being made. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Karen. And I, you know, I can attribute certainly the will to really see something on the ground and practical to the Western stock growers. Like they've really taken this on and championed this and are working and talking to a bunch of people out there about this, including, you know, like some politicians, including some potential buyers. So they're very excited about actually having a working market. And so it's really exciting, the work that they're doing.
Yeah, it's good to see. Thanks.
Carrie, I have a question here in the chat box from Lori Ann. And she's wondering, can you tell us more about who you see the buyers being and the benefits to them?
Yeah, so I'll speak specifically. I mean, the buyers, in the slide that I initially shown, like, so there's the, you know, the Ducks Unlimited, you know, have their kind of group of buyers, and then they implement that through their programs. NCC, same kind of thing. So sometimes it's industry that are looking for, you know, to improve kind of that sustainability index and those sustainability objectives. Sometimes it's like in the case of, you know, the ALICE program, like the buyers are the Cargills, the A&Ws, the Weston Foundation, that kind of thing. So in the Grasslands example, the buyers that they're talking to are industry, like Enbridge, I think it was Enbridge. It's, you know, they've involved and keeping in touch with organizations like ALICE and NCC. It could be kind of food chain buyers, like General Mills, I guess, you know, Cargill, McDonald's, that kind of thing, through sustainability, through this through their beef value chain already. It could be municipalities and water, I guess, related kind of buyers, utility companies. Could be buyers like that. So I think the buyers, the buyers exist. I mean, I'm working with, it's interesting because I'm working with, I've been in touch with this group in Texas, this eCarbon, and they have buyers for their carbon that are, they got in from the British consulate, they got in touch with a beer company in the UK. So the beer company in the UK wants to buy these carbon credits in Texas. And so I think like sometimes we maybe think too small in terms of market. And that goes back to some of the challenge with scale is like sometimes we maybe need to think a little bit even outside of Alberta or Canada in terms of the buyers. It's like some of those, international kinds of companies are also looking at buying these environmental benefits.
Okay, here's another question in the chat box. Carrie, are you aware at all of any similar programs, pilots, or work for acreages or for the farmyard?
Yeah, I haven't, sorry. I'm not really aware of them. I'm not going to be able to help you so much with this. I know that Land Stewardship Center, I think, has a program that look at acreages and farms, but I don't know that it's, I don't really know too much. I can't remember what it's called now. Maybe look at, that's the only one that I can kind of think of that would be at that scale. Generally speaking, we're looking at larger scale projects for sure, like quarter section level, I would say.
I do know of, this might not be completely like directly related, but last week we did a webinar on the green acreages program with the Land Stewardship Center, and they do a little bit of work. They help farmers with some funding for, not farmers, they help acreage owners with a little bit of funding for projects on their property. So I can put you in touch with that later. Who was it that asked that question? A Delaney. Sorry, I don't know your first name. It just says A, but I can send you a message with that information. It might be helpful to you.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of with the lunch. Yeah, Green Acres. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I only know because we just did a webinar on it just last week. So, and they're with the Land Stewardship Center. So.
Right. Looks like somebody's provided. Mildred's provided.
Oh, perfect. Thank you for that, Mildred. And somebody also asked, is it going to be made, the presentation and the recording? We are going to post it to YouTube. We are recording it right now. So it'll take me about a week to get it edited, and then it will be up on our YouTube channel. And I will send an email out to everybody that registered for it once it's posted so that you can go and refer back to our conversation today. I had a question, and maybe this isn't something that you can answer right now, Carrie, but as I was planning this event, I did have somebody say, oh, well, this sounds great, but I'm not where there's native grasslands. So this isn't something that will apply to me. But you did mention in your talk that there are plans, or there's the hope that you can expand it to other areas of the province. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So part of the challenge with this is like, you got to start somewhere, and you got to start with where the people that are interested in doing this. And sometimes you have to also pick it's like picking the whole low hanging fruit, right? And kind of working with that. And so the Grasslands one came up because it was the Western stock growers, but certainly what they're measuring could apply to croplands. It could apply to tame forage. It's just, where they're starting right now is from the basis of, well, let's protect what we have right now, I guess. And so they're really looking at being, just as a starting place, is being rewarded for, and I don't want to get too much into kind of where they think it can go, but being rewarded for, I guess, protecting. The restoration and the enhancement of grasslands, and then, you know, after you, for instance, if you were to convert like some marginal land back into grassland, how they think the market would work would be like a futures market, so that you would then you would measure kind of what you have, and then you would use the models to predict, you know, kind of that future ecosystem service benefit. And then in a market situation, you could be paid for that future, just as you're paid for, like in the canola market, you can be paid for the future canola that you're going to produce and bring to market. And if you don't bring that to market, so say you don't reach those outcomes, then you either have to buy those credits back, or you have to make it up somehow to that buyer. Pay it back, or give the money back, or you know, maybe keep working on it. Maybe you can work out a deal in terms of another contract or something like that. So that's kind of how like a futures market would work. And and then there's always like the risk management in these markets, where you could, like in that the registry component, which I didn't really talk too much about, but so you can also do a holdback as a risk management. And a lot of registries, like the carbon registries, do that as well. And so like in a, you know, you say you're going to achieve these certain outcomes, but they'll hold back 20-25%, and to say, okay, that's the risk management. So if you don't achieve it, there's still that risk, you know, that 20-25% that they hadn't paid out, or 50%, or whatever it is. So yeah, I think that answered the question. So the exchange is supposed, you know, is based on that it wouldn't just be grasslands in the future, that it would be more of a agricultural thing. And I shouldn't even just actually say, so I'm going to just correct myself for a second, because we also are testing it in the boreal forest with forestry companies. So, and to see if that's of interest. And so what they're adding in, maybe they'll add in some different indicators that are important to forestry and the boreal forest. But so they're kind of testing that index approach as well.
That's exciting. I live right on the cusp of the boreal forest, so we're quite far north here. So that's exciting to hear that that's also going to be included. Does anyone else have any questions? We have a lot of great, helpful people in the chat box sharing links and comments. So does anybody else have any questions to ask Carrie?
Okay, so her backyard's been showing increased insect diversity with introduction of native species such as, Western, sorry, I'm like reading Western wood, lily, and blazing star, also a variety of other pollinator attractions. So that's awesome. Thank you. So one of the things where we started with working with ABMI, the Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, is we did also measure, assess, include in our assessment process with the assessment of pollinators, pollination, ecosystem services, that kind of thing, mostly pertaining to native bees. But I know like there's a lot of research in the province that's going on that is looking at the pollination ecosystem services. And how we've included in the Grasslands Index right now is that could be part of the additional information that a farmer might choose to provide, knowing that certain buyers are interested in that. It's not there right now, but we have the capability of including
it. Okay, does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Okay.
We'll leave it. It doesn't look like anybody is piping up with questions, but I will, if you do have one, or you're simmering on something, I will give you an opportunity here. I'm just going to, if you don't mind, everyone that's joined us today, I'm just putting a link in our chat box. This is just to a survey to let us know what you thought about our webinar today. And if you could just, it takes about a minute to complete. If you could just click on the link and tell us what you thought about about the webinar today, that would be so helpful for us, because it helps us design our next one and make it even better. So I'd really appreciate it if you all could click on the link before you leave today and just fill out our short survey. There is a question here that's popped up. So what is the next step for a grazer?
Yeah, so so I think Grasslands manager, thank you.
Yeah, Grasslands manager.
I kind of assume that's what you meant. So as I mentioned, like today, I think if you're not already in touch with the Alice and the New Acre program, I would definitely take that step, because like I mentioned, that new program that they're coming out, Grazing Forward, I'm excited for that. And I think from what I've heard, a lot of that funding is going to start in be spent in Alberta, just because Alice is fairly strong in Alberta. So that's really awesome. In terms of the Grasslands pilot, I think all I can say is stay tuned. We hope to we have some candidate sites this year. Follow along, I guess, on the EcoServices network.ca. We're going to put out also the Western Stock Growers are going to start putting out a bunch of information on that. So yeah, so I guess that one I can only say stay tuned. It's coming, but yeah, not here yet.
Yeah, that's fair. It's a work in progress, right? So
yeah. The other one too that I'll mention, it's not necessarily anything that I've specifically been involved in. I don't know if you involved with the Canadian Roundtable of Sustainable Beef and the sustainability certification. So that's the one with Cargill, McDonald's, and a bunch of others, but it's at becoming a certified, I guess, as sustainable. So there's another place to check out and do something if you want to be certified for that. They have some information like that. And I think it's all aligned with the Verified Beef program. So if you're already doing things like that, then yeah, that's a nice step too.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions before we call it a day? Last chance for questions. If anyone has a question or comments too, we welcome comments as well.
I have a question. Is it McDonald's or A&W? I think you said A&W and Cargill earlier, and now it's McDonald's and Cargill.
So the sustainable beef one, I believe, is McDonald's. The one with Alice that I had mentioned in the presentation is A&W and Cargill. So Cargill's involved with both. And I think A&W might even be involved now as a partner in the sustainable beef one as well. I'm not too up to date on what's happening there. I just know that one does exist.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for your great questions and your comments today. The discussion is always my favorite part of our webinars, because we get to pull so much more information out of whatever topic that we're discussing. So the questions that you all ask are so helpful. I don't see any more questions, so I will thank you, Carrie, for your time today. It was a really great presentation, and it was so helpful to learn a little bit more about all of this stuff. For everyone on the call, I will be sending an email out once we've posted this to YouTube so that you can review it. And yeah, if you just want to take the time to fill out that survey, we would be so happy. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks again, Carrie.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone has a great day.
Yeah, great questions, everyone. Yeah, have a good day.
Yeah, take care. Really great questions. Bye-bye, everybody.